speaking to so that others can be recorded properly, because as you know, ladies and gentlemen, we are actually recorded online as well, and it is important that our microphones work. All right, good evening and welcome to our June 16th Committee of the Whole meeting. We are going to start this meeting on a high note, I think. We have a number of presentations as well as delegations, the first of which is from our RCMP, and it's a presentation for Heroism. And I'm going to leave it to you fine gentlemen. Go ahead and take it from here, if you will, and we'll continue on, and I'll make sure the microphone's off so that one can be on. Send forth the hero.
Good. My name's Greg Nardi. I'm a constable with the Oceanside RCMP. On March 18th, I responded to a complaint where ambulance service had requested our assistance. I didn't have a lot of information on my way there, so I was reading updates. And Isidore's father had fallen ill, and apparently he had called 911. As I was driving to the home, I noticed that one of the dispatchers that I was communicating with said, on behalf of myself and the Oceanside RCMP.
Don't be shy, Isidore. We're all friends here. Just neighbors. It's all good.
I would like to commend you for your quick thinking, your level head, and your heroic actions on March 18th. Showed amazing bravery and resolve when you called 911 and informed the emergency service father who was in need of. I have a certificate for you.
We are going to need a picture for sure. Isidore, before you take off, can I just quickly shake your hand? Fantastic. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Good job. All right, ladies and gentlemen, moving on to our second presentation this evening, and this is for a whole group of our local heroes, and it's the Parksville Volunteer Fire Department. It's an update on the BC Fire Training Officers Association Annual Conference and Training Week, and some accolades. Chief, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. It's a tough act to follow. As Council is aware, we hosted the annual Fire Training Officers Conference and Training Weekend, May 24th to 29th. Our fire department hosted 209 registered delegates from 92 different fire departments around the province, with 27 or so different training providers delivering numerous sessions over the 6 days. Over the course of the conference, our department received many accolades for the course, the venue, and the professional attitude and appearance of our members and the help that they were able to provide all the delegates. At this time, I'd just like to formally acknowledge the members of the Parksville Fire Department for their contribution towards the success of the conference. Without their efforts leading up to and during the conference, it would not be the success that it was. We had many members that took time off to help out with the conference, and there was a number of them spent many hours prior to the conference. In particular, Mark Chandler. He went around and collecting sponsorships, arranging food for the delegates for the off-site conferences when we're away from Tinamera. We'd also like to thank the members of Nanoose Fire Department, Arrington Fire Department, Dashwood Fire Department, and Qualicum Beach Fire Rescue for their participation and assistance in putting this conference on. I'd also like to recognize Deputy Chief Norris for his outstanding accomplishment in putting the conference together. Deputy Chief Norris worked hard for the past year to ensure we're going to be able to showcase our community and all that it has to offer and put a quality program together that meets the needs of the fire service. The vision that Mark had for the conference was not only met but exceeded. We were receiving statements from many of the delegates that it was the best conference ever, and this was coming from some of the delegates that have been to a lot of conferences. I had a chance to speak with the organizers from next year's conference, which is going to be the Township of Langley. They were a little nervous because the bar has been set quite high now, and that came back to me several times. I attended the Fire Chiefs Conference the following week, and I had a number of fire chiefs come up to me at the conference as well and commenting. They had been speaking to their training officers, and they had commented on how successful our conference was. And that goes to Deputy Chief Norris and all the committee that helped put the conference together. To cap off the conference, we also had one of our own chosen as Trainer of the Year by the Executive of the BC Fire Training Officers Association. Captain Mike Davidson was recognized by the association for his efforts that he does contributing to the training of our firefighters, and it is a well-deserved award. So just in closing, I'd just like to express my sincere appreciation to the members of our department for making our department stand out, and they did an excellent job, and it was a privilege having everybody here. So that's just a quick update of the conference, and it was a really busy week, real busy 6 days, but well worthwhile. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Chief. So good on all of you for having such a successful conference, and a special congratulations to Captain Davidson. That's quite an accomplishment, and I know from our discussions, Chief, that training is so pivotal and so important in maintaining the ranks and keeping interest, and also, of course, developing these professional firefighters.
Well, we have professional firefighters now.
I said developing further these professional firefighters. I've already made that mistake once in the past. Yeah. So. And it is a lot of effort, and it does pay. As you know, we've had recently we had five of our members went on to careers in the fire service, and that goes to the training and that is provided here in Parksville. And this is our second Trainer of the Year. In 2010, Deputy Chief Norris was awarded the Trainer of the Year award as well. So it's quite a feather in our cap of our small department. So. It really is. Good for all of you. Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our presentations this evening. We're now moving into delegations, of which we have 3 for you. The first up is a delegation from Kelland Foods. It's regarding the rezoning application for 371 Alberni Highway, and it's a presentation from Mr. Bruce Robertson. Bruce, I think you know how this works. You've been here in this room before. I see you've brought company, so as per the past, by all means, when you're ready, you have the floor. And we're trying to keep it to about 10 minutes given the number of delegations we have and the business that we're covering.
Not a problem. This will be short and sweet. But yes, we're here today to introduce our rezoning application to City Council in hopes of constructing a new Quality Foods at 371 Alberni Highway. The present location is zone multi-residential. And we're proposing to rezone the southern portion to 4 acres into commercial component. And what we're proposing is a 40,000 square foot store with an additional 10,000 square foot mezzanine to offer a shopping mezzanine up above to look back down below, and an additional 10,000 square feet of rental space in the northeast corner, and extensively landscaped with a parkade area facing the Port Alberni Highway. And probably the number that everyone's waiting to hear, will be offering 216 parking stalls, 2.5 times as much as we have now. And this is just conceptual at this time, but this has been drawing up some of the ideas of what we'd like to do to give it a nice first-class look. We recognize that it's the gateway to Parksville, and we really want to make an outstanding building here, really make a statement welcoming people into Parksville. So some of the community benefits that will be provided from this development will be provide a use that responding to the community need. We've done a impact study showing that there is growth in the community needing more commercial space. Provides an amenity that will be a benefit to residents of Parksville. And an inclusion of public plaza on the corner of Despard and Alberni Highway walkway connecting the on-site public plaza. So it'll be a bit of a park-like feeling along the Alberni Highway. There was $400,000 in excess of off-site improvements were completed in 2008, which we reflected on the purchasing the property. Some of those items that were done was Molliette and Despard Avenue to Bernard Street, downstream storm sewer improvements on Molliette Street and Alberni Highway, replacement of an aging water main at the intersection of Alberni Highway and Despard Avenue, and a cash contribution towards completion of signalized intersection Alberni Highway and Despard Avenue. In addition to that, we will be contributing another $100,000 as anticipated on improvements completed in this application. Improvements to the traffic signal to dedicated left turn moments and emergency preemption. Extension of left turn lanes for north and westbound traffic. A dedicated right turn lane for eastbound traffic on Despard, and signage and pavement markings on Molliette for bicycle lanes, and relocate the crosswalk in the center line, and relocate the Canada Post community mailbox. And ongoing quality foods will continue to ongoing support to local groups and organizations like the fire department, local clubs, in excess of $250,000 annually. So really, like I was saying, it was going to be short and sweet here, but the infrastructure upgrades, I'm missing that page, upgrades will be of over $1 million. Our development cost charges will be $525,000, 663 cents. The increased tax revenue will be an increase of $129,734 per year, and showing over a lifespan an increase to the coffers for the city of $6,486,700. And that basically is it, and I'm open for any questions at this time. So.
All right, very good, and we'll do just that. So we'll open the floor to questions from council. I see a hand, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much for your presentation. So when you talk about, I'm really happy you're having 216 parking stalls, by the way. But does that include, I know you needed, it calls for so much based on the square footage of Thrifty Foods. Does that also include the parking for the commercial retail units? Is that included in there?
Yes, it exceeds the recommendations. I think it's 213. We're over that. So yeah.
And a quick follow-up, and then we'll go to Councillor Lefebvre.
My apologies for calling it Thrifty Foods. It's quality foods. Sorry.
Now you know what I was whispering to her. Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for your presentation. On page 36, we're going to be talking about it later on in the council meeting. You said the proponent shall provide that their own expense a detailed traffic impact analysis, engineering service review, and environmental impact study. I have a specific question I couldn't find addressed in the report. When I leave town now, because I live on the water side, I usually come onto 19A and I go up Molliette to the top of Molliette, take a left on Despard and a right on Alberni to get out to the main highway. What I've noticed happening over the last, I'm going to say, month, is that the traffic coming out of Trillium or the traffic coming out of the Oceanside Health Center onto Despard, they're either making a left or right turn on Despard or they're coming down Mollett. Now, there's a stop sign there and there's a stop sign on Mollett. I see that as a potential problem if and when you build your grocery store. Have you dealt with that yet, or have you looked at that in terms of specifics? Because I would think that the other day I got to the corner of Mollett and Despard, and I mean, I don't mind waiting, but I had to wait because there were traffic coming off of Alberni, coming down Despard, traffic coming down Despard towards Alberni, and traffic coming out of Trillium and the Oceanside Health Center. So potentially that could be a very busy location. So I'm just asking you that question if that's being considered.
I don't have the full study with me, although it was turned into the city. I don't remember off the top of my head that being on concerns, but it definitely could be addressed. Yeah, right.
Yeah, go ahead with a follow-up, but just for the folks at home, so essentially it's been stated the traffic analysis did take into account egress and ingress from
I just, from that experience, and it's happened more than once, I would respectfully suggest that I could see, for example, if I were at the Oceanside Health Center and I came from somewhere and I decided I wanted to go shopping, I'm not going to go down Alberni, take a left on Despard and go down Mollett. I'm going to go right through that open road to cross Despard to get on to Mollett. So I foresee a potential traffic issue there. I'll just leave that with you.
Further questions from members of council? Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. And thank you very much for your presentation, Bruce and Michelle. The question that I have is becoming more immediate, and that's with the traffic flow and children just crossing Despard and Mollett, Mollett and the Alberni Highway and this type of thing. Is there any possibility that you would have your signalization in with respect to this fall? Because in fact, we're looking at no possible way, as far as Michelle is concerned. We're looking at an increase in school traffic, if you will, coming across that highway. And that's also a concern with your constructions be going on as well. So a couple of issues with respect to traffic, and I just ask you to be very cognizant of that fact. Thank you.
Comments, questions from council? All right. I don't see any further questions. Of course, this is a matter we'll be addressing in the regular council to come up. So thank you both very much for that update. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're moving to our next delegation now. This is from Kingsley Low Rental Housing Society. It's a rezoning application for 312 Hirst Avenue, and it's a presentation from Mr. Duane Round. All right, floor is yours, Mr. Round. Go ahead.
Yes, good evening, Worship, councillors and staff. I'm Duane Round, billing chair for Kingsley Low Rental Housing Society, and with me is the president of the society, Felicia Kreutzer. And so Felicia would like to give you a little bit of background history on the Kingsley Manor.
The Kingsley Low Rental Housing Society is a non-profit society that was established in 1965 to meet the shortage of affordable housing in the Parksville community and the surrounding district. The Kingsley Manor property was donated by Arthur Bartlett and built by the Canadian Legion in 1966 under the leadership of Charlie Baker and Jim Kingsley, who passed away, unfortunately, lately. Since then, the Society has developed and operates 2 housing projects, a total of 42 one-bedroom units. To be eligible to rent one of these units, the tenants must be 55 years of age and qualify under the criteria set by BC Housing Policy. The Society's mission is to be a provider, advocate, and resource for persons needing supportive housing. The Board of Directors is a group of volunteers with lots of experience in construction, operating affordable housing, and are active in the community. They are highly motivated and committed to this proposed project. The board works closely with other community services, organizations, and agencies to connect their clients to the services they need. The Society retains 1 staff paid member, Executive Director Lori Nickerson, to manage board and tenant relations, financing, and accounting. The Society proposes redeveloping the Kingsley Manor site by removing the older 6 units and replacing it with 28 independent units for seniors and adults with disabilities. We believe this project will provide the City of Parksville and the residents with a valuable asset for many years to come, while allowing people to remain in their community close to friends and relatives.
Great. Thank you, Felicia. So what do we want to do? Exactly what Felicia just said. We want to demolish an older 6-unit, 1-story building and replace it with a 3-story apartment consisting of 28 one-building units of nonprofit, independent, supportive living units for low-income seniors and adults with disability. It would provide 28 parking units screened from the street on the existing grade, mostly underground. The building will include accommodation for refuse removal, vehicle parking, setbacks, and landscape screening. We made a similar presentation to Council on July. I need some more room here on this thing. There we go. That's better. Thanks. Oh, now I really messed up. Uh-oh. Not that good at this. Oh, sorry about that. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. We made a presentation to Council last July 3rd in regards to this redevelopment, and we also appeared on October 7th where Council supported waiving the DCCs. I've attached the preliminary drawings, which shows second and third floors having 13 units and 2 units on the bottom floor. Does it meet the community's needs? There's been numerous studies done over the last few years. I've been a part of some of them that shows a definite need for more of this type of housing in the community. One of big interest is the BC Housing Rental Study of 2012 that showed that we need to increase supportive housing in our community by 25 to 34% by 2036. And there's also a recent Oceanside homeless needs study done. And we also have a big waiting list of about 85 people at this time looking for accommodation. We've received lots of support in the community from different groups, including Michelle Stilwell, MLA Michelle Stilwell, Hospice, PCCC, Elder Life, SOS, and others. And we feel this would reduce the health costs by keeping people in their community near family, friends, and support services. It's at close to a bus stop and easily walkable to downtown, and would help with some of the rising house prices that's putting more pressure on affordable rentals. What do we need to do to accomplish this? We need to rezone the property from residential 1, RS1, to a site-specific comprehensive development. We're looking for a density of 159 units per hectare, which is slightly higher than the multiple residential maximum of 150 units per hectare, which is a difference of 1 unit. We would need to provide a traffic impact assessment prior to implementation and a hydrogeotechnical support at the building permit stage. All the trees will be retained where possible, and if need to be removed, we will try to plant a similar variety and recognized in a tree management plan. We provided a servicing report from Park City Engineering detailing the necessary off-site servicing and will be included in our project costs. Of course, we'll need to access funding from senior governments, but to do this, we need to show that the zoning will accommodate the project and that the community is in support, especially the City Council. We will be considering other sustainability options at the development permit stage, including a rain garden, water pervious surfaces, and solar ready, among other things. And we've applied to the RDN to relax the DCCs according to their bylaw that was put in place for Huswick Place. We also have a plan in place to deal with the existing tenants to relocate during construction and work with adjacent owners to limit any impact on their properties and, of course, obtain the funding. The benefits to the community. We'd end up with 28 affordable one-bedroom units for low-income seniors and adults with disabilities, 16 square meters of outdoor space, 75 square meters of indoor amenity space. It's compatible to the surrounding buildings, which are mostly all multifamily, and would keep seniors near transit, near family, friends, providing them sports services that will keep them in the community longer. And we'd also, of course, include universally designed and adaptive housing to accommodate persons with limited mobility and persons with mobility assistance devices. And we'd also be prepared to enter into an affordable housing agreement with the city, with rates to be determined to set at substantially lower rates than the maximum eligible rate of $1,005. And this will also free up existing housing for the rental market. Other benefits is that it'll maximize the assessed value, enhance the value of adjacent properties, and the residential infill supports higher density according to the OCP 8.2.1, which states Parksville supports development that provides affordable housing and the partnerships to provide it. The meeting room will be able to be used for Tai Chi, yoga, or events similar to that will allow the residents to participate. And it will support, to an extent, the downtown revitalization similar to Huswick Place. Property is currently mortgage-free and will remain as low-income housing in perpetuity. We have key board members that were quite involved with the Building Alliance Huswick Place, and the society itself has been operating for 48 years and shows that it's quite capable of operating and maintaining affordable housing. And if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Round. Thank you, Ms. Kreutzer. So, does any member of council have any questions for the delegation? Okay, I will make a comment. I'm a little concerned, not with respect to the society or your record in terms of this type of housing, nor with your intentions. We know those are true and noble. However, you'll note there is a staff report on tonight's agenda. It's basically stating that there's some real missing information and staff's not in a position to make any sort of real recommendations to council, and I'm worried about my colleagues around the table and how they might see that. I do note that in this presentation you do address a couple of the points in that report. Is this something that with a little bit more time you might be able to come back to us with some more detail? I'm just sort of looking forward here, and again, I have not had opportunity to speak with members of council directly on this in the most recent past, but is that, you talked about some studies and whatnot, are those even started yet or underway with respect to traffic analysis and or servicing?
Yes, Your Worship. With all due respect, we are a non-profit society, so the amount of financial available to us to do studies like this is very limited until such time as we can actually apply for funding. And it's almost like the chicken and the egg, which comes first. We can't apply for funding from the government until we can show that it'll have the proper zoning to allow this type of development. So it's kind of a catch-22 for a society such as ours.
And with the density that you're looking to achieve here, of course, it pushes you just above our OCP. And as you note in that report, there is some discussion about an OCP amendment. Is that something that's a sort of a breaking point, or is there a possibility of keeping it just under the maximums?
Yes, Your Worship. We could try to reduce the amount of units and fit under the OCP. The issue being is that BC Housing, for a project like this, they like to see on average 30 units to make the project feasible, because at the end of the day, the society has to maintain and operate this building based on the revenue that we get from the tenants. So that's a number that they put out there. We've already reduced it down to 28. You know, until we can't even do any our financial estimates on the construction of the building to see what kind of rents we'd be able to charge until such time as we have the amount of units finalized or close anyways.
Okay, and I can see the complexity and difficult aspects of your situation. I do appreciate that, and I know from even when we were working on Hustwick Place, it is a bit of a chicken and an egg sort of catch-22, because you do need to have that support in place just to access the funds in order to undertake some of the work, so I do appreciate that. No comments, questions from Council? Councillor Powell Davidson.
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for bringing affordable housing for our seniors to Parksville. I'm very excited that organizations like yours do exist. Just a quick point of clarification. I think I heard you just say 28 units, and yet our report says 29. Can you just clarify which is the correct number?
Through your worship, to Councillor Powell Davidson. Yes, we did at the last minute deliver to the planning department a new plan showing one unit reduced. That was after spending some money hiring an architect to take a new look at the rough design that we proposed, and he saw that we were lacking in some handicap parking and stuff like that, and amenity space for servicing the building, such as electrical rooms and that type of stuff. So he eliminated one more unit. So I apologize for that late change of the plan.
All right, very good. Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much, Duane, and for your presentation. I guess the question I have is through Your Worship to staff. Given the chicken and egg scenario that Mr. Round has talked about, would it be possible, would it be possible to proceed to with the project? Because it does say on page 66 that some inconsistencies now appear, but it would be possible for staff to prepare bylaws based on the maximum density and minimum parking indicated to date. Proceed and make a condition that we'd be waiting until the Kingsley Housing Society gets the grant money to do these other studies. And is that doable? And that sort of giving them a statement from the city through a motion that says yes, we would provide the waiving of DCCs and fees and that sort of thing, and allowing them to go forward and get these reports done by getting grants from the provincial government. Is that doable?
Looking at you, Mr. Russell. You're becoming our favorite staff member, I think, in some of these meetings.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Lefebvre, there's aspects, and I don't know if we should talk about this now or when we're in the formal council agenda part, but there's aspects that can be secured. It's a little challenging in that to secure them, you need to prepare covenants or other such things. That's kind of what, in a sense, it's sort of a chicken-egg thing from our perspective, too. Once the zoning's in place, it's kind of out of our hands with some of those requirements. So I think when we get to the staff report, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but at the end of the day, there's a level of comfort that council needs to have with its information, and if council's comfortable with the level of information provided, we're certainly in a position to move a bylaw forward, but at the end of the day, it's that you have the information that you need to make an informed decision.
All right, so you did answer your question. Other members of council? Go ahead, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks very much, Mr. Round. Just when we approved Husquet Place, did we, to refresh my memory, did we do a what do you call it, amendment, an OCP amendment, or was that just?
If I may, Worship, through to Councillor Supal, my recollection is that the zoning was already in place. I believe there was a development variance permit as well as a development permit to actually authorize the construction and parking configuration, but the downtown zone itself allows for residential above the top floor, and that's why there's that commercial component on the bottom. The only other process involved was the city had a housing agreement. The housing agreement's the thing that provides the waiver to the development cost charges, and for council to enter a housing agreement, it does it through a bylaw adoption process.
Okay. Follow-up, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I remember this when we did Husquet's Place as well, that we were, it was like the chicken and the egg, and one of the things you couldn't get the funding, and I think we provided a letter or something, didn't we, to BC Housing? Can you remember that?
At one stage, I believe we did. Go ahead, Mr. Round.
Yes, through your worship to Councillor Powell. Yes, it was the chicken and an egg thing where to get one government to say yes before the other government would say yes, and getting them all to say yes at the same time was a little difficult. But one thing that the city did for Huswick at that time was give us or forgave us, so that we didn't have to give the bonding on the landscaping. So there was a letter that was done up for that specific item. But Director Russell is correct. It was currently zoned correct, and there was a number of variances granted on it.
All right, very good. One final follow-up by Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. And so through you to the Director of Planning, so the bare minimum that would need to be done is an OCP amendment before we could move forward, or could you talk a little bit more about that?
Just in brief, and then we will get into the detail once we're in the actual item.
So if I may, Worship, through to Councillor Supal, the application that's been applied for is a rezoning application. In this case, it's also triggering an amendment to the OCP to facilitate the density that's proposed. Those processes can be run concurrently, so it would just follow along the rezoning process if council chooses to pursue that route.
All right. Don't see any other hands in the air or comments or questions. I want to thank you both for taking the time to update us. You may want to stick around, obviously, until we get to our next meeting and discuss this in greater detail. Do appreciate what you folks are doing, though.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come out and speak to us.
Thank you. All right, we're now moving, ladies and gentlemen, to our third and final delegation this evening, and this is from the Parksville and District Historical Society. It's a request for change to the lease for 1245 Island Highway, and it's a presentation from Peter and David. Very good, gentlemen, so come on forward, and the floor is yours when you're ready.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of Council. The Parksville and District Historical Society is requesting we're requesting a lease and a special permit to operate a heritage-styled farmers market on the grounds of the Craig Heritage Park from July 11th to September 26th on Friday evenings from 5 to 9 p.m. The justification for this is that the museum needs to develop a new source of revenue to maintain its primary mandate, which is to provide museum-related services to the citizens of Parksville. We also want to head off any future need to seek financial assistance from the City of Parksville in order to keep our doors open. We do, however, receive from the city the use of land and tax exemption, and we are extremely grateful for that. In return, we provide exceptional value by maintaining and articulating the history of the area in a professional manner and to professional standards. Fundamentally, our museum is a community museum that needs to find new, innovative ways to draw the public onto its grounds and into its facilities. To do this, we need to explore special events as a draw to encourage public visitation, to boost attendance and public awareness of our museum so we can grow and develop to our full potential. We first came before Council on April 23rd to request a change to our lease so that we could run this event. During the meeting with Council, it became apparent that the land we occupy is incorrectly zoned for this purpose due to an unfortunate zoning change, unfortunate for us, that had occurred 2 to 3 years ago. The zoning change that occurred flipped the zoning for the museum with our neighbor, the Chamber of Commerce. We were asked to discuss our plans with our neighbors, the Chamber of Commerce, and the residents of Craig Bay, and obtain from them letters of support for this farmers market. This we've done, and the letters are to hand. I believe you should have copies of those.
We've seen them, yes.
Okay, good. Both letters are of support are tempered with some qualifying comments. The Chamber has concerns about recycling garbage as well as parking. The Craig Bay residents have expressed some concerns about unsafe stopping and parking on Northwest Bay Road, unsafe pedestrian crossing, music and noise, customer litter on the streets. We are very sensitive to all the concerns raised, and the following steps have already been initiated at the planning stage. Vendors will be required to remove all their garbage and recyclables. It will be part of their contract. Parking will be strictly monitored and controlled to ensure that the Chamber's parking lot is not used before 5:30 p.m. Vendors will be required to park at the Heritage Mall, which is across the street from the museum. The owner has agreed to this and will provide us with a specific area for vendor parking. He's very supportive of this market. In fact, he sees it as an opportunity to generate some exposure for the Heritage Mall to the public at large. Music and noise, none are planned. We have no planning for music or noise. Lit on the streets, we will check before and after the event to ensure that the area is left in the same condition. So that the residents of Craig Bay can get to know us better, we have invited all of them to visit with us at the museum on June 29th at any time during the day at no cost. On an ongoing basis, we will be asking both our neighbors to inform us directly of any concerns they have during the operation of the market, so that we can troubleshoot issues right away. We will be evaluating each session in relation to our own success indicators, as well as the areas of potential concern that they have expressed. And that essentially concludes our presentation. And I would only want to add that, as far as we're concerned, the stage is set. The grounds are prepared. We are also fully accessible for wheelchair users through our recently paved pathways. We are ready. We just need a decision and an opportunity to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So to that end, I will open the floor to members of council. Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you for your presentation. I have two questions. My first question is that when I visualize a farmer's market, I'm thinking of fruits and vegetables, pies, cakes, cookies, jams, and jellies. How many farmers have you got lined up, or producers of food for the farmer's market that you're talking about?
Right now we have 30 farmers lined up.
30 farmers?
Yeah.
Oh, that's very good, okay. My other concern is Mr. Chilton the president of the Craig Bay Residents Association sent myself and my fellow councillors an email regarding their concerns that you've enumerated. And I can tell you what my concern is. If these things aren't controlled, it would be like giving somebody a baseball bat to beat me over with if these things aren't looked after. So that would be a fairly large responsibility on your part.
We are hoping to work with other organizations in the communities, like Citizens on Patrol. We also need to talk to the RCMP. We need to broaden the horizon of people we involve in this, and we think we can manage those things. If things start to go sideways, we'll stop and reassess.
Other members of council? Okay, so essentially what these gentlemen need from us, which we cannot undertake at this time, but certainly in the meeting to follow, is the opportunity to have their lease amended to allow for a special event during the time frame that has been described. Council could consider that as a trial and then ultimately reevaluate after that time to see how well it's worked, since there does seem to be some level of support from the neighbors as we requested. Gentlemen, thank you very much. So perhaps under new business, I think I've already had a little birdie tell me there's a motion floating around that might achieve what I just suggested. Okay, and that'll be in the meeting just following this. Thank you very much. It sounds exciting, actually. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our delegations. We're now going to move to our sole report for this committee of the whole, and that is from our Director of Community Planning, Mr. Russell, and it's consideration of development process procedures, and it's in support of the report that's included in this agenda tonight. When you're ready, Mr. Russell, the floor is yours.
Maybe slightly less interactive than originally anticipated.
Wonderful when everything is working right, isn't it? But it's all worth this paperless society we now have. Microphones have started working. Wow. Small miracles.
Maybe there's some magic. Oh, there we go. Okay. So thank you, Your Worship, and Council and the public. So Council passed a resolution on January the 20th, basically directing that staff be requested to prepare a report outlining the city's current development processes, including options for providing additional efficiencies and or time-saving procedures for consideration to Council. We have about a 20-plus page staff report that provides an outline of these processes. This report really intends to provide a general overview. There may be and provide some general suggestions where processes may wish to be further explored, and we'll kind of go through that as we work through our presentation. So basically the city itself back in 2011 conducted an external process review. The conclusion of that report was that most turnaround times for development applications are not unreasonable for the most part in Parksville compared to similar sized jurisdictions. In our publication, when someone makes an application, one of the important things for a developer is to kind of have a rough estimate on the timeline that it's going to, their process is going to involve. The top numbers here are basically what we publish, what we sort of estimate they will be. Our actual timelines come in under that. So for a development permit, for example, between 2010 and 2013, our average processing time was 4.2 months. What should be kept in mind is we were doing an OCP review at the time. We had one staff member on maternity leave. So we were sort of light on our complement at the time. Our average rezoning and OCP amendment process is 13.5 months. Our subdivision application process, the initial PLA stage, is at 2.9 months, with the final subdivision approval coming in at 25 days. So I'm going to first of all talk about development permit areas, and these are applications where the land use is permitted, but there's an opportunity to have guidelines that shape the development based on different kinds of criteria. So one might be environmental protection, protection of farmland from development, form and character, water conservation, revitalization, hazardous conditions. The most common one that we see before us typically is probably a form and character or revitalization type application. They tend to involve architectural particulars, those kinds of things. Other ones are more specific to certain properties that are near, for example, a bluff or a river, those kind of environmental type guideline processes. So in our process, and this sort of outlines it here, I don't know if the mouse will show up very well, but we have our initial intake process. Once we have a complete application, a file is created, staff prepare an initial acknowledgement letter, and that application is referred to various city departments. So it's referred to the engineering department, the fire department, as well as in the planning and building department. So part of the reason for these other referrals is, for example, if you're building a building and you're proposing a certain parking layout, it would be helpful to know if the driveway is going to have a traffic conflict. We have an opportunity early on before the architectural proposal is finalized to sort out some of those site adjacencies. Some things we rely upon a volunteer fire department. It might be helpful to them to be able to identify early on that they would like an enunciator panel near a certain building entrance, or it'd be helpful to have a fire hydrant stand at a certain location. So we basically send that information out to the various departments, and we collect comments back. The response time is actually very good from the departments, but it does take a bit of time to coordinate all of that information. The next step in the process is the application is referred to the advisory design panel. The advisory design panel is a panel made up of experts, primarily with an architectural background or landscape architectural background. Their role is to review the application, and they basically provide advice to staff and council on the architectural particulars of those applications. Depending on their comments, staff may be liaising further with the applicant to ensure that suggested changes have been incorporated into the design. There may be possible revisions based on the comments of the advisory design panel. Obviously, if there are revisions, there may be a little bit of time involved. The next part of the process is the actual statutory process. At this point, the application is advanced to council, and basically the question before council is whether or not to issue the permit. If council issues the permit, then it's a matter of the proponent signing it and providing the required landscaping security. From the date that council passes the issuance resolution, the proponent has 2 years to fulfill the terms of permit before the permit lapses. Over time, we actually have modified a little bit of the process. We used to have the applications come before the committee of the whole. Part of the expedition process is those applications tend to come directly to council at this point. But there are other certainly opportunities in these processes where council may wish to consider changes or not, and it comes down to whether council feels it's getting value for the comments received. The extent of referrals, certainly we don't have to send them to the engineering department or the fire department. I think there's a strong benefit from those referrals. I believe that at the end of the day, the proponent's probably further ahead because it early on in the process identifies potential items. However, it is not a requirement. It doesn't have to be a requirement. The other is the advisory design panel. So anytime we have to schedule an application for meetings, we're really looking at probably a 4 to 5 week time frame to schedule the meetings, to book it, to refer the application out to the advisory design panel. And it's really a question is, for council, does council feel that that architectural advice you're receiving is outweighing any time benefit that could otherwise happen in the process? So the other aspect in the statutory process is certain types of permit. Right now, every development permit in Parksville comes before council for consideration of issuance. That's actually, council can, if it so chooses, delegate the issuance of development permits. Typically, not all development permits would be delegated to staff, but certainly more minor development permits could be delegated to staff, which again saves on the preparation of a staff report, as well as some of those kind of complexities. And you know, I haven't gone into things like the staff report requirements, but even some of those have expanded over time on the expectations of what those reports contain. So financial implications, strategic plan implications, it all add to the information that council is seeking as part of these application processes. So that's an example of development permit. The development variance permit is actually fairly similar, with one exception. We don't have a design panel because they're usually not architecturally related. The main process, we basically receive the initial application intake, ensure that it's complete. We send referrals out to the various departments. The response is usually fairly quick in this regard because they're usually a slight roof height adjustment or a setback change or an elimination of one parking space or something like that. The process, however, has a bit more of a statutory requirement to it in that we have to provide notification that's established through both the Local Government Act and through city bylaws and policies. Because of that, it actually comes to council twice. It comes as an initial staff report to council. Depending on council's decision on that, whether to proceed or not, we then do notification where it comes back to council a second time. Again, there are opportunities that, in this case, as I said, the referrals, we get a very quick response because these are fairly straightforward, simple kind of applications, a height change, a slight height change. But there's certainly, in the statutory process, applications we could automatically send notice. And a staff report could come before council after the notice is done. So that would save a step in the process. But at the end of the day, what probably would happen is council would end up getting questions in the street without being informed about what the application coming in is. As well as if council doesn't wish to entertain an application, then we've wasted a bunch of effort undertaking notice from the fees that we've collected to process the application. So as I said, there's some limited opportunities, but there may be there if council wishes to pursue those. Computer. Okay. So probably the one where the process is more complex is really the bylaw amendment process. So this is a rezoning application or OCP amendment. At the initial stage, certainly anyone who approaches the city can certainly ask for a pre-application meeting to find out what the OCP policies are, whether or not staff believe we'd be in a position to recommend a proposal just based on our understanding of the OCP, whether those policies support it. The area where there's opportunity for some flexibility and for council to consider is really at the application submission and application review stage. Once the application is in the statutory process, we're pretty much governed by that process. There are still, believe it or not, some tweaks, though, in that process as well. And I'm going to go into this in a bit more detail. If I can, I guess the mouse doesn't work. Okay. So, again, here's a similar kind of thing. So we have our application process, completed application, file created, acknowledgement, referral, technical review. One of the biggest challenges with these kind of applications is actually a completed application. This type of application has a fair level of information. And that's evolved over time. But at the end of the day, we want to ensure that the property is serviced. It has water, sewer, storm drainage capabilities. We want to be able to answer questions that council may have with respect to traffic, safety of the land, those types of things. Because out of all the application stages, this is the application stage where council has discretion whether or not it approves an application outright. And so as part of that process, council can look beyond the frontage of the land for those servicing to ensure that if infrastructure upgrades are required a block away to facilitate a proposal, that those services are in place. As part of that, the technical due diligence for this type of application is a little bit higher. So that technical review is a fairly big component of this type of application. The next stage we do after the technical review is we basically send an initial letter out to the applicant, identifying anything in their studies that are potentially deficient or where we need further clarification. Once they've responded back to us, then we're in a position typically to bring forward a report to council or the committee of the whole, as well as typically at that point we would then refer it out to the Advisory Planning Commission, as well as have the proponent host a public open house. Sometimes the timelines are actually at the applicant's control. So when we send an applicant a letter, we may wait a couple months before we hear back from them, or they may have other reasons why they've made an application. We don't always know the full reasons, but quite often between this initial stage, and the reality is this review stage is probably a 2.5 to 3 month review for all the different departments to go through the technical documents. Once we've sent that out, it's really their experts that need to respond to those queries to provide clarification. We try to deliver to council really all the answers that you may have. We try to anticipate what those are so that you have the information that you need to make an informed decision on the application. And that's really what we try to undertake in bringing forward full applications to you. Once it's in the statutory process, it's then in the political realm, the public consultation realm, and it steps through that process. So the total bylaw amendment process is probably about an 18 to 14 month process in total. Are there opportunities for changes? Well, there's certainly, again, there are referral levels of technical detail that council can look at. For example, engineering detail, fire department detail, but there are huge benefits to having that information. You have an assurance, as best as we can at the staff level, that we're confident that that project can be serviced, is serviceable, is safe. It's kind of a good housekeeping seal of approval, if you will, by the time the report gets to council. However, we're often in this position as staff where we're kind of the meat in the sandwich a little bit on some of these processes. And so, council could look at, staff could bring out a report to council early on in a process for council to determine, is this information sufficient? And if not, then council can refer it back to staff and the applicant to sort out that information. If council feels the information is sufficient, given the level and magnitude of the development, then council can proceed with a bylaw process. But again, that's really, it's really for council to decide that. Are there other refinement opportunities in the process? Well, we do have a public open house requirement that's come in as a result of public consultation through the OCP, as well as other council directives. It isn't a statutory requirement for a rezoning application to have that. That obviously adds additional time to an applicant's proposal, as well as we have an Advisory Planning Commission. The Advisory Planning Commission's role was really to provide another public lens for the benefit of council, to advise council, in a sense to kind of give almost not an early warning, but kind of an early heads up on what an informed public sentiment may be on an application. It's up to council to decide whether that commission is providing a benefit. If the advice and information that they're providing is beneficial, then you may want to keep the commission. If you feel that it's no longer providing that role, and over time council has expanded, other commissions have been set up, then that's something that can be revisited. There are some aspects of the statutory process. So, a staff report and a bylaw for first and second reading could appear on the exact same agenda. There are benefits to council having it not appear on the same agenda. It honestly gives you a little bit more time to reflect on the staff report that you've read. It gives you a bit of an opportunity to ask staff some questions on that information. The other opportunity is third reading and public hearing can be held at the very same meeting. We actually have looked at that before. It wasn't well received, but it can be done. And again, that can, there's not that same opportunity to reflect on the information that you've received. So there's steps in the process that certainly can be amended to expedite the timeframes that are involved. They typically mean having more bylaw readings or less council meetings, actually, where applications are brought forward to. Certainly the technical review end of it, some of that boils down to resources that are allocated for those review purposes, as well as the level of information that council or level of information that those applications contain. Obviously, the more information they contain, the more review that's involved in those processes. So the other one is subdivision. Subdivision is a fairly straightforward proposal. It's typically about a 1 to 3 month review process. It's actually approved by an approving officer. So for the City of Parksville, Vaughn Figuera, the Director of Engineering, and myself are approving officers for subdivision applications. It's a technical review process. It really is, does it meet the minimum lot size? Does it have sufficient services? Is the land geotechnically safe? Those kinds of things. That initial review process for a typical subdivision is probably about a 3 month process. Then when the proponent comes in, the approving officer has 60 days on final submission to actually approve a subdivision application under the legislation. So I have to respond within that 60-day time window. We're usually actually less than 30 days for that final approval response. Should point out too that in the case of subdivision, there's actually nothing stopping anyone from just applying for final approval. It just means that they would probably get a very long letter outlining all the technical parameters that we don't have information on in order to make that decision. These are just, I guess, skip for this one. So, sort of an overview of options for change. So, delay the technical review, which basically what we're trying to say here is we could bring an application forward before the technical reports are in. I will say that you can do that. I will guarantee you will get more applications. Your application volume will increase because you're likely to get more speculative applications. Because the reality is the bar to enter the process has been lowered. And so you will find that you will probably get more people testing the waters to see if council has an appetite for certain types of applications. So you can do that, and we can lower that, delay that technical review to later on in an application process. You can modify the roles of the Advisory Planning Commission and the Advisory Design Panel. Maybe there's certain kinds of development permits that aren't of a magnitude that need to go to the Design Panel. Maybe there's certain kinds of rezoning applications where it's more clear-cut that the Advisory Planning Commission role is not necessary. And those are some sort of areas where you could look at that. Or, again, if you're not finding that you're getting value for that additional process, then they aren't requirements. Certainly applications can go ahead without Advisory Design Panel review or Advisory Planning Commission review. It's really if you feel you're getting value from that information, then it's a benefit. If you don't feel you're getting value for it, then it's probably not. Then it's probably just wasting time. So it really is your decision ultimately on those processes. Another example, and again, you don't actually need a public hearing on rezoning applications that are consistent with the official community plan. You don't need a public open house on those applications. Those are all, now I will preface this that that's not the message we certainly heard during the official community plan review. And those policies aren't contained in the official community plan. What we heard from the public was there was a desire for more public input in these processes, not less. So that's, basically the OCP has sort of formalized some of that consultation, such as having public hearings and having open houses. Development permits, that's probably actually some low-hanging fruit that there is some opportunity for some delegation of some more basic development permits if that's what council wants. At the staff level, it certainly allows us to expedite the processing a little bit. I'm not necessarily saying I totally want it, though, because quite honestly, it does put a little bit of heat on staff Someone might not like something that staff has approved as part of a development permit. So, you know, it's a bit of a mixed blessing. But most jurisdictions, some more minor types of development permits may be delegated for staff issuance, and that's something that can be explored further. Other aspects where processes can be expedited, you can run a development permit concurrent with a rezoning. I think there sometimes is a mixed message what that signal that may send, and that's really for council to decide whether that they're comfortable with that message, because if we process a development permit with a rezoning, there may be a perception, although it's not correct, but there may be a perception there that the approval is kind of done. And it's really up to you if you can live with that perception or feel that it's unfounded. But certainly, you know, where a developer is fairly certain on the proposal that they wish to build, certainly a development permit could be run concurrent with the rezoning process, and that would possibly expedite that second process at least throughout it. The other is just trying to improve the technical submissions that we receive, and quite honestly, time does accrue when we don't have a complete application where we have to go back and get additional information in an application. I'm just going to skip the rest of it because it gets a bit, I think I've covered enough for now. So.
All right, thank you, Mr. Russell. So I will open it up to members of council if you have any questions for our Director of Community Planning, and of course there is a recommendation there to receive. Go ahead, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much, Blaine. So you're talking about minor types. Could you give an example of what a minor type for staff to approve a development permit?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Powell. So, for example, a development permit in the industrial park. How critical is an advisory design panel review for a warehouse building in the industrial park? Do you want to see that type of application come to council? You know, that might be an example. Or maybe it's a certain size of building, a building below a certain size threshold. We haven't established one yet, but maybe there's a certain size threshold. Maybe when it's less than 4 multifamily units or 5 multifamily units. There's certainly magnitudes of things that could be looked at where council may say, you know what, a small gravel parking lot with some plants going around it. Was that something that council wanted to spend time putting its mind to? And really, at the end of the day, only you can answer that ultimately.
I'll see Councillor Greer first, and then Councillor Lefebvre, and then Councillor Powell-Davis.
Good, thanks for your presentation. I had mentioned some time ago, probably a year or 2 years ago, that I thought to speed up the process, whether we needed an advisory design or advisory planning commission. And I know some of the people on those commissions, and they've told me that they have a meeting and then they don't have a quorum. So then it's put off for another month. And it seems like it's not that important, even coming from some of the people on those planning commissions, the advisory commission. What is your thought on that?
If I may, Your Worship, some of the commissions are more difficult to obtain attendance than others. The design panel probably more so than the advisory planning commission, primarily because they're architects who are working architects in many cases. However, we have taken applications before council when we haven't had a quorum. We've made note of it, that we didn't have a quorum, and we let council make the decision whether you were comfortable proceeding with that application or not. So we just don't have an official design panel review in that case. It's kind of like it didn't go. So I think it really boils down to, do you feel as councillors that you're getting value from that architectural input? And really it's free architectural advice that both, in some, often the proponent themselves may benefit in their ultimate design, but again, it's really whether you feel that that is achieving what you want in the built form of the community.
Just to follow up, this comes from 2 or 3 of the people who have worked on these design panels, and it's even their feeling that sometimes they feel it's a waste of time from the way we consider things, and also the fact that getting them all together is a problem. And I would think bypassing those 2 situations would be helpful. Thanks.
Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Blaine, for a very thorough presentation. I'm concerned overall by throwing out the baby with the bathwater. You've gone through a fairly extensive presentation, and when I looked at the summary of typical development applications, in the case of a development permit, a development variance permit, subdivision application, operational permits, and building permits, we're below the average. We're doing fairly well in terms of timelines from the report that you gave us on pages 14 and on pages 15. The zoning bylaw amendment or the official community plan amendment seems to be the one that's up there in terms of timing. And in some of the options that we're looking at, again, not wanting to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I would like to pursue what you've talked about in terms of level and magnitude. Maybe there seems to be room for some movement there, and you've just given us some examples when Councillor Powell asked you the question. But overall, I look at the timing. The timelines seem to be on average for most cases better than average. So again, I don't want to throw. I'm going to say it the third time. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I want to make sure, because there are delegations that have come to this council and said, you didn't do this, or you didn't consult enough, and you didn't have enough, give us enough time, and that exists out there in our community, and rightly so. So I want to first of all thank you for the report, and I think that the only thing that would interest me, I think the advisory design panel and the advisory planning committee do a good job, especially on the larger projects. And as you said, if they can't come to a conclusion, if they get locked in a quorum, it comes to council anyway. But I would look at those two items, level and magnitude, to see where we could maybe cut back some items that don't have the level magnitude, whether it's from an engineering standpoint or from a financial standpoint, that we could maybe do some changes there. But other than that, overall I'm fairly satisfied.
All right, so I've got quite a number here. I've got Councillor Paul Davidson, then Councillor Neufeld, and then Councillor Morrison. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And what a tremendous amount of work you put into this report, and I just want you to know how much we appreciate that. So thank you. Excellent report. My question was kind of similar to what Councillor Lefebvre was just saying, and that's in regards to all of the average timelines that you put in the report are less than the published process. So I guess I'm wondering, first of all, is there really a need to make these changes at this time? And I'm concurrently asking the question, are we at a really busy time for these processes, or should we wait till there's a bit of a downturn if we're going to be investing resources into doing a review and implementing some resources to improve efficiencies? I also want to know, are we getting, for lack of a better way of asking this, complaints from the development community that things are taking too long?
Developers ever upset at timeframes?
Well, honestly, I'm not a developer, but if I was, I would complain about any process too, and that's quite, I'm gonna push you to get all the efficiencies I can out of a process, because at the end of the day, I want to get building, and I'm going to do that to any local government. Whether your process is actually really good, I'm still going to tell you it's terrible. That would be my position if I was in that business. So. Yes, we probably hear those kind of things. The reality is we're within industry standards for a community of this size. So, that's all I can kind of go with.
I can address that a little bit, because often if there is a complaint, it's going to be directed at the mayor, as you might well expect. And I can tell you that as of late, there have not been a whole lot of serious concerns being expressed about our processes in general. I've actually heard quite a number of compliments about not only our planning staff, but about admin in general, and about some of our processes. And I had one instance where someone was actually hoping to slow the process down a little bit for other reasons. But it's certainly, in my mind, at least in terms of the perception that's out there and what I'm aware of, it's changed considerably since prior to that first sort of kick at the can when we looked at our processes through Stantec. You made the one quote there at the beginning. And I think there's been a general sense of improvement there over the last several years as far as the processes as well as how we are able to manage and accommodate development requests. Quick follow-up, and then we're going to move along here.
Thank you, Worship. I appreciate you explaining that. And I do, you know, I appreciate that we want to look for improving efficiencies everywhere we can, but I've sat on the advisory design panel for quite some time, and I really do believe there's a lot of value in bringing in community experts to be involved in the process. I think that gives a level of comfort to certainly to me in my decision making, but I would imagine to a lot of the residents too. After all is said and done, it's about making sure that the best for the city happens and engaging the city. So I would like to see that continue, although I appreciate what Councillor Greer was saying, that sometimes they can't meet quorum, and I think we need to look at possibly bringing in a few more members to ensure that we have that. That's it.
All right, thank you. Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. And thanks very much, Blaine. I like your honesty coming forward, looking at the developer's point of view as well. I guess there are a couple of things that I would take out of this, and that's the open house. I think is critical. In some cases, open houses there's no great concern, but in fact, in some instances, there's tremendous concern. I think the open house that is put on as far as the developer is concerned is extremely important. On the other hand, the public hearing, I'm not sure. I think that that is something that we might be able to look at. But those are my comments. And as far as the ADP and the other planning commission, I take Councillor Greer's position that I think we could possibly remove them. But what I actually the point that I would like to make is would there be time? How much time do you think it would take for council to debate all of this? And I think that it is absolutely important that we critically look at all of this and have a discussion amongst ourselves with respect to what could be changed. And I think that there are a number of things that could be changed in addition to the planning and design groups. I look at well, I have one question on page 14 as to is the approving officer, as far as the decision maker is concerned, does council delegate this responsibility to the approving officer with respect to subdivision applications, or is this a provincial mandate? I mean, there are a number of questions that I would like to be able to ask either you or the rest of council or Mr. Manson. And I think this document is extremely important, and I think that we should have far further discussion concerning it before we made any decision about it. There's just so much that we could actually speak to, and that's the comment that I would make, Your Worship.
Okay, I can address that a little bit. So you'll note that we're at a committee of the whole. So all that is being proposed right now is a recommendation to receive, when we haven't even gotten to that stage yet. You're absolutely right, and I think council has only really had opportunity to view this report since late last week, as is traditionally the case with our meetings. And so at the very least, this would not come back until the next subsequent meeting in terms of an actual motion out of that recommendation. Although I was going to suggest to council what you may want to do is simply evaluate this on your own time, talk with staff in between, and if there are elements there that you think are important that you may wish to proceed with, then bring them forward in the form of a motion at a future meeting, and we can have those discussions with the appropriate people in the room. Moving on, Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to go out on a limb and agree with Councillor Neufeld that we need some time to go over this. I was going to suggest that we go through and also refer it back to the ODCA and Vancouver Island building just to get comments as well. I really appreciate the work that has gone into this. I think there's some really good information. I would kind of reiterate Councillor Bauer-Davidson's question, though, regarding the timelines that are put through, and you did mention that it was during the OCP and a staff shortage. It was also during a time of fairly low application, was it not?
If I may, Worship. Our application basis is probably not a good metric, because when we're not getting applications, we're getting inquiries about future applications. So it's not a great metric. So much of what we do is answering inquiries on applications that you may never see, that never actually, come to this body. So it wasn't a particularly low time. It was probably a medium kind of time.
Okay. Just a quick follow-up.
Follow up, and if you want, you could make a recommendation as well.
Okay. I just wanted to basically state that I agree with Councillor Fave to find a way that we can, whether there's a metric put out to give staff the option of bringing it forward, and I know that puts a bit of weight on staff's shoulders as to what level is important, but I really think there is quite a few applications that could go through to staff without coming to council at first, ultimately council having the final decision. So I appreciate the report, and I will make a motion to receive.
So recommendation to receive, did you want to add into that a referral?
Yes, I'd like to refer this to, do you want to just refer till?
Just make it as part of the recommendation, and then, we can vote on it at the next meeting. So a referral to the ODCA and the Vancouver Island Building Association. Okay, so we do have that recommendation on the floor, and lots of seconders I see. So let's say Councillor Lefebvre, and now discussion on the recommendation. It is still just a recommendation at this stage. Okay, the only thing I would add, just one other thought is, and you pointed this out, Mr. Russell, we did go through a rather extensive official community plan process, very extensive. Multiple years, as a matter of fact, and you're right, there was a prevailing theme within that about public engagement, obviously, in development processes. It seems that development is often very high profile here in our community, and I know, as speaking as just one member of council, but having been so involved in that process, I would hate to move away from some of that, because I think it is very much entrenched. And one thing that I just remind everyone, part of the benefit of coming up with a newly updated OCP is it does provide a lot of certainty and predictability for the development community, because they have a clearer understanding of what our up-to-date land use expectations are in the city, and I think that in itself probably facilitates faster development timelines. So I think it'll be interesting to see what specifics will come out of council with respect to the various elements within this very extensive report. And thank you for having such a critical look at yourself, Mr. Russell. So to that end, is there any further discussion on the recommendation? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And now we just need a motion to adjourn our committee of the whole. Moved by Councillor Fay, seconded by Councillor Paul Davidson. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We stand adjourned. Folks, we're 99 minutes in. I think maybe we could